The following program contains scenes that some viewers may find disturbing.
She would be the life of the party.
Everybody who she met just fell in love with her. She was drenched in blood from head to toe.
It was just so shocking.
Nobody was telling me anything about the murder.
No one ever asked me if this was true.
Once you keep that kind of a secret, it's hard to come out with it.
Such rage on his face, he looked like a monster.
The sin against God and man.
Austin, Texas is one of a kind. A buzzing center for music and the arts. Its unofficial slogan, keep Austin weird.
Austin, it's a really cool, small, big town.
The city likes to call itself the live music capital of the world. It's really glued to its music identity.
The clubs on 6th are its heart and soul.
In Austin, let's see, the cowboys and the hippies would come together.
Austin has its own quirky personality and is very proud of that.
But the town's laid-back vibe hides a darkness. A darkness revealed one fall night in 1985. "16-year-old Johnny Gowdy is sleeping off a night of partying when suddenly he's awakened by his mother's roommate, Susan Ott.
Something happened to your mom.
Susan woke me up, saying that my mom was downstairs and she was covered in blood.
Mom, tell me, who did this, Mom?
It was just so shocking, so earth-shattering to see her in that state.
Susan calls for help.
The Austin police.
My friend is sitting here in a pile of blood.
Ma'am, listen to me. Calm down, okay? We're going to help your friend out. Does he need an ambulance?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to connect you to EMS. Tell them the same thing, okay? Hold on.
Now, that was a Sunday morning on October 13th, and at that time was the shift change for police officers. And the ambulance had a hard time getting there.
Natalie Antonetti's injuries make it impossible for her to talk. She's unable to tell her son and roommate what happened.
Oh my God. What's wrong?
She stood up. It was unbelievable.
Mom!
Something! No, don't get back like that! Yes.
She just kind of started doing things.
No, don't go up the stairs, Mom, please!
It was horrible.
Mom! Mom!
At one point, she went all the way upstairs and into the bathroom and closed the door. It was very strange.
Mom! 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 Mom, no, seriously.
And she was covered with blood. She had suffered such a traumatic injury. She tried to wipe herself off with a tissue.
There's blood everywhere. Mom!
It's obvious the tissue wasn't going to be much help.
I don't know what I'm doing. Hurry up, Mom! Mom!
First responders are having trouble finding Natalie's apartment.
Once they got there, they had to call the apartment back to see exactly where the apartment was in the complex.
20 minutes pass before help arrives. At the hospital, doctors scramble to save Natalie's life. The top of her skull is shattered, and her brain is swelling dangerously.
Wasn't gonna leave her side. When she was going in, I asked her to give me a kiss. And she gave me a kiss. And that was it.
Natalie was the only person that Johnny really had, and Johnny was the only person that Natalie really had. So they were very, very close.
Natalie goes into a coma, her life slipping away. The assault on Natalie gets little public attention.
The initial story didn't even give her name. It was wedged in amongst all the other assaults and homicides they had that week.
Doctors conclude her injuries are no accident. She's been savagely attacked.
I think it was fairly clear pretty quickly that the brain was damaged beyond repair and that there wasn't very much hope for a recovery.
They thought that it's very possible that this is going to be a death. That's when the homicide detectives were called in.
At 10 a.m., homicide investigators arrive at the apartment. Lead detective is Eddie Bellagio. His team starts poring over Natalie's apartment for clues.
The problem with the crime scene was that she had moved around so much. It was very hard to say exactly where the assault had happened. We believed it was on the couch. That's what made the most sense. That's where the most blood was. But she moved around so much, effectively contaminating the crime scene.
There was no signs of any forced entry.
There was also an indication that perhaps the door was never locked, that it was open.
With no leads, the detective's best hope is for Natalie to regain consciousness and identify her attacker. Day after day, her son Johnny hopes for that too.
What else are you gonna think? When you're that age and it's your mom. There's nothing you can really think except that she'll pull through and, you know, make it out of it.
That day never comes.
She never woke up. It's heartbreaking.
I remember the day that she did die. When I got there, I remember them saying, you know, that she wasn't gonna make it. There's no words I have to describe what that really felt like.
October 31st at 6:18 p.m. That's when it becomes a homicide. The cause of death was blunt trauma on the head with a blunt instrument.
The coroner can't say for sure what that instrument is.
There was never any inkling if it was a pipe, a baseball bat, you know, anything that would cause that damage.
From the beginning, the homicide investigators are fighting an uphill battle.
Those 18 days between the time somebody is attacked and they die, sometimes the police lose an edge.
Natalie's murder couldn't come at a worse time for police. Austin's usually low crime rate has just skyrocketed, and they're spread thin.
The week that Natalie was assaulted, there were 4 homicides in 5 days. The guys were excellent investigators, but I think that they were pretty much stretched to the limit.
Detectives don't believe the other homicides are linked to Natalie. And yet, whoever attacked her clearly had murder in mind. "18 days after being savagely attacked in her Austin, Texas apartment, single mother Natalie Antonetti dies of her injuries. The assault is now a full-blown homicide investigation. "38-year-old Natalie was divorced, raising her 16-year-old son Johnny on her own. A former Montessori teacher with a degree in philosophy, she just started a landscaping business.
Her business, I think, was starting to do well. Her life was cut short at a time when she was really almost having like a renaissance as a person.
She shared with him her love of the outdoors and of music. Just really seemed like a really sweet duo, those two.
Natalie built her life around her son. 2 years earlier, they moved from Houston to Austin so Johnny could live out his dream.
My interest in music was so strong that I really wanted to come here and be around the music scene.
It's a passion Natalie shared. Detectives begin nosing around the clubs on 6th Street she used to frequent.
A lot of the people that she did know were musicians. A lot of her friends were musicians.
She had a fairly strong social circle and would go out and hang out with her friends. She seemed like a really cool person.
She had a lot of personality. A lot of times would be the life of the party. She loved to dance and, you know, have a good time. She loved music so much.
Everybody who she met just fell in love with her.
Make the little devil horns over her.
Police speculate Natalie's bohemian lifestyle is what got her into trouble. For starters, they learn Natalie's 26-year-old roommate Susan Otten, who first raised the alarm, was involved with her teenage son.
Natalie and Susan were friends, and Susan was dating Johnny, and this was just how it was. Surely there were some raised eyebrows because of the age difference.
I'm sure there was some kind of issue to it, but I just don't think it was made that big of a deal. I liked being around adults.
Flouting conventional rules is all part of Austin's outlaw music identity. And that makes it hard for the police.
The culture was very different. This group of musicians, of young people, were very mistrusting of authority.
So there was nobody really that wanted to have anything to do with the police.
Partly because when they did, they got the third degree from some pretty aggressive interview techniques.
Investigators put together a timeline for the night Natalie was assaulted.
She was home Saturday evening. Johnny came home. That was somewhere probably about 9:30 in the evening. And then later on in that evening, she went out on 6th Street. She was seen in 2 different bars. By all accounts, she didn't drink much. It was more of a social scene. It's about 2 to 2:30 a.m. when she arrives home. Her roommate, Susan, was there. They talked a little bit. She goes outside, takes a walk, goes down by the pool, and she's gone for about 10 minutes.
Sometime later, Susan goes up to sleep. Natalie falls asleep on the couch.
Susan woke up. She heard thumping sounds from downstairs, the sound of a door closing, and then some moaning. And that's when she found Natalie.
Natalie's neighborhood, Barton Hills, is a safe district. There's no evidence her murder is random.
It was a good area of town. Certainly not a dangerous part of town.
Police canvass Natalie's apartment complex, hoping to find eyewitnesses.
So it was more like I saw him a little bit later, too.
One neighbor tells them he noticed something suspicious.
There's a man who lives at the end of the row of apartments, and his name is Don Shelley. He had seen a man lurking outside the apartments, looking in windows, a man who was carrying a child's baseball bat.
It was pretty thick, like the nostrils were sort of,
Don Shelley sat down with a police sketch artist.
kind of thick and pronounced.
A composite sketch was created.
His neck was pretty broad, too.
The physical description was a white male between 5'6" and 6 foot, at least 220 pounds, with a big belly, broad shoulders, and longer hair. That's the trail that the homicide investigators went down.
His description was basically all the police had at the time, and it really focused their investigation. Every suspect they looked at, they compared their physical description to the description given by Don Shelley.
One suspect emerges after a suspicious note is found in Natalie's apartment.
There was foul language in the note. It was signed DD.
DD is Natalie's on and off again boyfriend, Dennis Davis.
It was a note that a jealous man would write. It starts out by telling her to go to hell, and then it goes on talking about this guy that she was seeing for a brief time. He's definitely displaying his anger towards her and this other guy.
The Dennis-Natalie relationship is complicated. On the morning of the attack, he was the first of Natalie's friends to arrive at the crime scene and comfort Johnny.
I liked him. To me, he seemed even-keeled.
They were like family. I mean, they had a really close relationship. He cared about her. And to have this happen to her weighed on him.
But the angry note is damning. Could Dennis Davis have been angry enough to kill the woman he loved? Investigators in Austin, Texas have a new twist in the murder of Natalie Antonetti. An abusive note found at the crime scene has police taking a closer look at Natalie's sometime boyfriend, Dennis Davis.
Dennis Davis was a recording studio owner, and a lot of musicians from the time knew him. He was a presence in the music community.
He was also a mentor to his girlfriend's son, budding musician Johnny Gowdy.
He opened his studio to me. I think he recognized my interest in music and in recording and in all that stuff, and was very generous.
There was a certain boyish charm to him. Kind of shy, goofy guy, sweet.
Dennis and Natalie had a rocky year-long relationship.
I knew that he and my mom didn't have the greatest of relationships. I could tell when things were kind of on again, off again. Something was holding one of them up from committing.
They never lived together. They were never that close. But they were a couple, no doubt.
Before the police asked Davis to come in, he shows up on his own.
I had a late night at the studio and went back.
If people are that open and they come in and they want to give you a statement, your first thought is, this is a friend of theirs and they want to help on the investigation.
Detective Eddie Balagia immediately confronts him about the angry note to Natalie.
Yeah, that's fine.
Eddie Balagia told him that it does no good for you.
Natalie, you can go to hell.
He told Eddie that he was a little upset at Natalie, and he dropped off the note.
We had an argument.
And put it on her door at some time before the assault.
Got home after.
The big question for the police?
Was there.
Where was Dennis Davis the night Natalie was attacked?
No big deal.
He was at home in Onion Creek, which is the other side of Austin, about a 15 to 20 minute drive. watching a movie with a woman he was dating at the time.
Davis has an alibi, and the cops have another reason to look somewhere else.
They had a description of the killer. It didn't match Dennis Davis.
Detectives dismiss the on-and-off-again boyfriend as a suspect. And they can't find anyone in her music-loving circle who might want her dead.
She seemed like a very gentle soul. And as far as I could tell, throughout all of the investigation, she didn't have a single enemy in the whole world.
Then, a break.
A month after the assault, police receive another 911 call from Don Shelley. He claims to have seen a man who looks just like the man he'd originally seen.
Austin police rush to Barton Hills, hoping to take down Natalie Antonetti's killer.
Don Shelley points him out and says he's the guy who looks like the potential murderer.
And the guy was apparently intoxicated. So he was taken down to police headquarters.
On the hood. Come on.
And he was cooperative. He was fingerprinted. It was compared to any fingerprints found at the scene. No prints matched. He was polygraphed. He passed the polygraph. He was eliminated as a suspect at that time.
He was just a homeless alcoholic who happened to resemble the man that Don Shelley had seen. Once he was ruled out, the investigations kind of slowed down. The problem was that Natalie was so well loved, there just didn't seem to be anybody who had any reason to cause her harm. Nobody's pointing a finger at anybody. They just don't know where to look.
Finally, 2 months after Natalie's murder, detectives believe they have a serious suspect.
There was a rape in North Austin. This person was caught. They brought him in, and when they started looking at him, they realized that he was living in the same apartment complex that Natalie lived.
Marty Odom is known to have a bad temper.
Marty Odom's roommate said that Marty Odom claimed to have slept once with Natalie. So he became suspect number one.
When Don Shelley is shown Odom's photograph, he confirms it looks like the man prowling outside Natalie's apartment the night of her murder.
It's gotta be him. It's gotta be.
Austin PD, I think we need to have a chat.
The police search Odom's apartment and find a kid's baseball bat.
Where the hell this came?
He was a great suspect. I think any detective that would work that case, and myself included, looking at that would probably put every effort into somehow finding out if he was the one that murdered Natalie.
It's about time. If you're gonna level, you level now.
Adding to the cops' suspicions, under interrogation, Odom cracks and recants his story about sleeping with Natalie.
I'm telling you, I'm done.
He admitted that he just made that up to make himself sound like a big man to his roommate.
Detectives turn up the heat.
He confessed to the rape straight away,
We know you were there.
but he always denied having anything to do with this murder. Even when he was offered a very good plea deal. He refused to take it simply because he claimed he had nothing to do with the murder.
Odom is convicted of the unrelated rape, but detectives can't find anything to tie him to Natalie's killing. The case cools. As the years go by, the investigation becomes the least of lead detective Eddie Belagia's problems. In September 1990, 5 years after Natalie's murder, Belagia is diagnosed with cancer and passes away 2 months later.
He was a respected investigator. It was a really devastating thing for the police department when he died.
The case was already pretty much on the shelf, unfortunately, going cold. When he died, I suppose it just was ignored.
The Antonetti murder case is ice cold. 21 years go by. Then, in July 2006, Austin police receive a call, turning it red hot. It's been 21 years since single mom Natalie Antonetti was bludgeoned to death in her Austin, Texas home, and her killer has never been found. Now, the police catch a dramatic break.
In July of 2006, there was a phone call to Austin Police Homicide, and it was from a woman by the name of Rebecca Davis, who at the time was going through a divorce with Dennis Davis.
Dennis Davis was Natalie's on and off again boyfriend at the time she was killed. A tape of Rebecca Davis's call is handed to cold case detective Tom Walsh.
It was something that was sent to me several years ago.
That call gave him a new suspect. It was a fresh tip, and they ran with it.
I think you should be looking.
Rebecca Davis said that Dennis Davis made this statement back in the early 90s after they first met, that he had sinned against God and sinned against man.
Dennis, what are you talking about?
And she also said that she knew he had a girlfriend that was murdered.
I just can't get it out of my head.
While it wasn't an outright admission, she felt and had felt for more than 10 years that it had something to do with Natalie's death. That the person who knew him the best would link a very compelling statement that he'd sinned against God and man to the murder of Natalie Antonetti. To us, that was very powerful.
Rebecca Davis, Tom Walsh.
Yes, this is she.
Detective Walsh follows up with Dennis Davis's ex.
Yes, I know. You know, I've changed my mind.
And she explained to me that they were going through this reconciliation.
You have nothing to say?
Rebecca Davis backs off her statement and gives Detective Walsh no help at all. But within hours, Walsh gets a call from Dennis Davis himself.
Tom Walsh.
I kind of go from the standpoint of, I don't know what's going on with this case, and I need some help.
There's some new information.
This is where our conversations started, and this is a tactic that detectives will use dealing with people who are a possible suspect.
Evidence has come up.
There was the different avenues I go down, and he was one of them. But I did not have him as a really good suspect.
Tom Walsh basically started from scratch. That meant looking at every single person who knew her, looking at all the original suspects and eliminating them one by one. It was essentially building a brand new case.
Detective Walsh tracks down Natalie Antonetti's son to let him know the case has come back to life. Johnny, now 38, is an accomplished musician with his own band.
I was at a thrift store buying a pair of very cool wingtips. And a guy called.
Hello?
Hello, my name is Detective Tom Walsh. John.
Yeah?
Don't worry, you're not in trouble. That's the first thing he said, and I was like, okay.
Yeah.
And he told me what he was doing, and it was the best conversation.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, this is really serious. Like, this guy's really going after this. You could just tell he was really serious about his job.
Detective Walsh digs into Dennis Davis's background.
He was a guy that probably had a lot of great potential. That potential never really came to him. He's working in the recording industry in Nashville. There were some big names that he'd worked on, but after you really look close, you see that he wasn't really the big guy that maybe people thought that he had turned out to.
The cold case investigator finds a man whose career frustration spills into his personal life.
I talked to people that he had gotten in fights with, people that he had punched, men and women. Talk about this guy that would have such rage on his face that he looked like a monster.
As Detective Walsh digs deeper, he discovers a flaw in the initial investigation.
In any homicide investigation, you can chase down every rabbit hole and there are thousands of them in every investigation. But in this case, they didn't have the time to do that.
This rabbit hole is huge. Davis had claimed he had spent the night of Natalie's murder with his girlfriend, Amparo Garcia Crow, an alibi that was never checked.
We spent the night together and...
No one ever asked me if this was true. I'm from the police department. Nobody ever called and said, hey, by the way, were you with Dennis Davis on this night?
We spent the night together.
And that would have been an easy answer a week later.
Hey, man.
Dennis Davis was not a suspect at the time. He didn't match the description given by Don Chelli. And he was being helpful to the police. And then when you throw on top of that how busy they were with 6 homicides within 1 week, it's not such a huge surprise that they wouldn't check out his alibi.
More than 20 years after the fact, Detective Walsh tracks down Amparo Garcia Crow.
You had some questions?
He said, do you remember Dennis Davis? I said, yes. I dated him for a short amount of time in the mid-'80s, and he said, did you know Natalie Antonetti? And I go,
I do.
remember meeting her.
Absolutely.
Do you remember where you were?
No, I can't.
He said, do you remember where you were when she got assaulted? And I'm going, okay, that's trickier.
Really, I don't know. I really don't know.
You know, sometimes the questions you ask are long shots. The problem with cold cases are memory.
Yeah, we...
Sometimes people remember things and sometimes they don't.
No. And I had a blank about that.
No, I don't.
Why wouldn't you in 20 years? I want to be careful that I'm not making things up. And that's when I told him that I had journals I could check on that.
I keep journals.
And he was really delighted that I might have something like that.
Yeah, I've been keeping them all.
I never expected her to have those journals. First of all, I never knew that she would be writing in the journals every day of her life.
Well, if you like, I could hunt that down.
I felt good. I felt good about it.
Amparo digs through her old journals to find October 1985.
And that's when I could definitively say I wasn't there. I was in rehearsal for a play. And I had just gotten back with my old boyfriend, and we had had a honeymoon reunion together.
Davis's alibi has just evaporated, but that's a long way from linking him to the crime.
I'm still keeping an open mind because still nobody was telling me anything about knowing any facts about the murder.
The detective gets a tip that an old friend of Davis's, Jimmy Rose, may know something about the case.
Mr. Rose.
When Tom Walsh first contacted Jimmy Rose,
It was a long time ago, but I do remember.
his response was, wow, I've been waiting for someone to call me about this. Because for all these years, Jimmy had suspected his friend Dennis of doing this.
All the time. We had some real blowouts once in a while. Actually, a bunch of us, actually.
He tells me about this emotional argument that he witnessed between Dennis and Natalie
I said wait!
in a club on 6th Street about 4 hours before she was assaulted.
I'm not gonna tell you. You lied.
How long?
I'm not gonna
Tell
tell
me!
you.
Did you report that at the time?
Well, no, because
Jimmy Rose didn't come forward 20 years earlier because he mistrusted police. His account is another nail in Davis's coffin.
actually outside the studio. Or actually, no.
He told the truth when he was asked, but he knew for so long and never proactively did anything that I think that's kind of sad.
Would you have been around the scene?
With evidence building against him, Detective Walsh runs his name through a database and strikes gold.
These reports that I found were either violence against women that he had dated or other men that these women had dated.
One name appears several times in the reports: Galinda Mudgett.
Galinda was with Dennis from 87 to 89. It was a very turbulent relationship. I never really expected her to tell me what she told me.
And they said back in '85.
She tells me about him having this breakdown.
But there was one night that
He was in a rage for 3 days.
a total mess.
When he finally came out of it, bawling like a baby, he was saying, I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
What are you talking about, Dennis?
She asked him what he's sorry about, and that's when he tells her that he's sorry that he killed Natalie.
Why didn't Galinda ever come forward with this damning story?
She was afraid of him. Once you keep that kind of a secret to yourself, it's very, very hard, I'm sure, to just suddenly come out with it and say, by the way, I've been keeping this huge secret.
It's taken Detective Tom Walsh 2 years to gather and evaluate all the evidence. The only hitch, Davis doesn't match the neighbor's description of a man with a baseball bat. Police now think he just got it wrong. With no alibi. A witness who saw Davis and Natalie fighting on the night of her murder. And 2 damning confessions to girlfriends. The noose is tightening around Dennis Davis. Cold case investigators now believe Dennis Davis killed his sometime girlfriend in a jealous rage 23 years earlier. Austin cold case detective Tom Walsh has spent 2 years methodically building the case against him. The evidence comes from those who knew him best.
So it was 2008 by the time the police were ready to confront Dennis Davis with what they've learned during the investigation. That his wife had called them, that his ex-girlfriend Galinda Mudgett had told them that he had confessed. Jimmy Rose said that he was together with Natalie Antonetti the night of the killing. That Amparo Garcia Crow told them that Dennis Davis was not with her the night of the killing, basically blowing a hole in his alibi.
Police digging into his background find that the record producer's drinking has recently spiraled out of control. He's doing 3 months for drunk driving in a Pennsylvania jail. When Austin detective Tom Walsh finally gets to grill him.
He agreed to talk to me. We interrogated him for probably 4.5 hours.
Davis denies everything, starting with Garcia Crow's shredding of his alibi.
But she said she wasn't with you that night. She remembers it. Why did she say that? And it was an emphatic, no, I was not with Dennis that night. So, can you help me? Can you help me with that? She was there.
According to Davis, Galinda is lying too.
What if I told you that Galinda told me, gave me a sworn statement, that you told her that you killed Natalie? Did you kill her? No.
If you catch a child with his hand in the cookie jar, and you're standing there with his hand in the cookie jar, and you say, you know, why is your hand in the cookie jar? And he'll look at you and say, my hand's not in the cookie jar. That was his reaction. And he said, well, you have everything you need. What else do you need? I said, let it go. I said, just give me a confession. And he'd say, I didn't do it.
It's not the truth. You didn't kill her.
He would never cross that threshold and admit that he had murdered her.
With no confession, no forensic evidence, and no eyewitnesses, the case against Davis is shaky.
It's rare you have so little connecting a defendant with a killing.
This is a very circumstantial case, but I felt good from the beginning.
I had no idea what I was getting into. Most of the cases that I have are pretty cut and dry. The evidence is set in stone almost. And so most of these cases is a question of negotiating the outcome. I knew we had a case. I just didn't know whether we could win it.
On July 2nd, 2009, almost 24 years after the murder of Natalie Antonetti, U.S. Marshals arrest Dennis Davis in Nashville, Tennessee. Detective Tom Walsh gives Natalie's son, Johnny Gowdy, the news.
When you sit across the table from somebody's loved ones and you tell them that you're making an arrest on somebody who killed their loved one, that's a pretty powerful moment right then and there.
Detective Walsh's dedication was a life-changing thing for me and for everyone in my family. It just makes you deal with it a little bit better, I think.
In the spring of 2011, 26 years after the murder of Natalie Antonetti, Dennis Davis faces justice.
A former Austin music studio owner goes on trial for murder.
The story was big news. It wasn't a slam dunk.
The star witnesses: Galinda Mudgett, who recounts Davis's confession to her; Jimmy Rose, who testifies he saw Davis and Natalie fighting; and Rebecca Davis, Dennis Davis's ex, who reignited the case with her call to police, then backed off. She's forced to testify, even though she still stands by her man.
This was my first murder case. This is the only trial I've literally lost sleep over. Many, many nights of sleep. So I wanted to do everything I could to be as thorough as I could, and I wanted to see where it had happened because I knew I would have to tell the story to the jurors. There were a couple of things we wanted to do in the trial. And one of the most important was take them back to the crime scene because it told a story. It told the story of what had happened. This wasn't a burglary because there was nothing taken. And we even reenacted thumping sounds to see how loud that was. As much for ourselves as for anything else. In closing, I wanted to make sure that they remembered the crime scene.
Mark Pryor's a strong prosecutor. He is very charismatic, and he's a storyteller.
The story Pryor presents to the jury is compelling.
This murder was only about one thing. And that was about somebody who was very, very angry at Natalie. There was only one possible person who that could have been, and that was Dennis Davis.
I said wait! Wait!
Dennis Davis and Natalie had a fight that night.
Over you.
Who is he?
Move on.
He was angry with her.
Okay?
He was jealous.
Natalie was asleep on the couch in her living room. He knew she was in there. He was carrying a baseball bat. The door was open. He went in. He beat her.
He had his rage on her as she slept. Her skull had been shattered by 6 or 7 blows.
It was very, very quick.
A sin against God and man.
After 2 weeks of testimony, the case goes to the jury. 3 hours later, a verdict.
We, the jury, find the defendant Dennis Davis guilty.
The family of victim Natalie Antonetti hugged each other and wept.
I feel like justice has been served. I just want to thank the cold case department, especially Detective Walsh, for just for solving this case and letting us all sleep a little bit better tonight.
The family feels pretty good. I feel pretty good about the verdict, and it's over.
Davis has handed down 36 years. He can still appeal, but at age 60, it's unlikely he'll ever see daylight again.
There's a huge sense of satisfaction that we did the right thing by the family. The conviction is the closest thing to closure they're ever going to get.
Mark bringing my mom really to life in the courtroom really showed people the person that had been lost.
It was going out there and, shaking the bushes and a lot of knocking on doors, and it paid off. And so that I'm very satisfied with.
Now 42 years old, Johnny Gowdy is still making music. Memories of his mother never far away.
I feel like there's a lot of my mom in me. A lot of the core sort of things are my mom's influence. She loved music so much. It really, meant a lot to her.